Easter brunch at the Caldwell's 22 relatives. Lily's on the table. A champagne flute clinked as someone asked Olivia about her job.
Oh, honey, you were adopted. Didn't we ever mention it?
Olivia's fork hit her plate. The room froze.
Her birth mother was a 16-year-old runaway. We never told her because we love her.
Frank kept his eyes on his napkin, twisting it into a tight rope. 22 faces turned toward Olivia. No one chewed. No one blinked.
This can't be real. Not here. Not now.
Olivia shoved her chair back. The screech of wood on wood cut through the silence. She walked out of the dining room, past a gallery of frozen faces. The front door clicked shut behind her. Olivia stood on the lawn, shaking, the Easter sunlight too bright. Olivia stood on the lawn, trembling. She almost turned back toward the door, hand reaching for the knob, but then an engine hummed. A black SUV pulled to the curb, tires crushing pale pink petals that had fallen from the cherry tree. The door opened. A woman in her early 50s stepped out, dark gray suit, silver-streaked hair pulled back, a thick manila envelope in her hand.
It's her, Catherine.
Their eyes locked across the grass. No smile, no greeting, just a long, fierce look heavy with years of secrets. Catherine turned away from Olivia and walked toward the porch, heels clicking deliberately on the stone path. Olivia couldn't move. The sun pressed down, too bright. The world outside that house had suddenly narrowed to one woman climbing steps. Catherine climbed the steps, each one deliberate. She reached the porch and paused, her back straight, the envelope at her side. Her hand lifted toward the brass door knocker. The lily-shaped metal glinted in the afternoon light.
This is really happening after all this time.
Catherine's knuckles struck the door 3 times, firm, unhurried. Inside, the chime echoed through the silent house. The door swung open. Sandra stood there, still wearing the smile she'd had at the table. It fell off her face the instant she saw who it was.
Are you the woman who told my daughter for 28 years that I abandoned her?
Sandra's mouth opened, but no sound came out. She gripped the doorframe, her knuckles white. Behind her, Frank was halfway into his coat, one arm in his sleeve. He froze, staring at the stranger in the doorway.
Sandra, who is this?
From the dining room, a murmur rippled through the relatives. Chairs scraped. Someone gasped.
I don't understand. You're supposed to be dead.
No, you just told everyone I was.
The threshold between them shrank until nothing existed but the weight of a 28-year lie. 14 months earlier, Olivia sat alone in her apartment, a DNA test kit open on the kitchen counter. The email headline glowed on her laptop. Ancestry DNA results. 99.7% match. Catherine Morgan.
My birth mother is alive, and she's been searching for me.
She typed a short message through the portal and sent it before she could let fear stop her. The response came within minutes. I've been hoping you would write. Can we meet? 3 days later, Olivia walked into a coffee shop. A woman with silver-streaked hair was already there, a manila folder on the table. Catherine looked up and for a long moment neither could speak. The noise of the cafe faded.
I'm not the teenager they told you I was. I was 22, finishing my degree when you were born. I never wanted to let you go. They told me you died.
Olivia's tears dropped onto the table. Catherine reached across and covered her hand, and the weight of 27 years began to crack.
I signed an open adoption, quarterly photos, annual visits. For your first year, I wrote you a letter every season.
She lifted a bundle of envelopes from the folder, faded paper tied with a pale ribbon. Everyone marked return to sender.
Then I got a letter from Sandra. She said you died of SIDS at 6 months, and I was never to contact them again.
They told her I was dead while I was breathing in the next room.
I only learned the truth when a detective found the original paperwork 2 years ago. The agency had nothing about your death. The Caldwells had simply vanished with my daughter.
All those years they made me feel unwanted, and she had been searching for me.
After that day, they met in secret. Sunday afternoons in quiet parks, weeknight calls after Olivia's work. Olivia guarded the meetings like contraband.
Sandra can never know. Not until I'm ready to face her with the whole ugly truth.
The months rewired something in Olivia. She walked taller, She answered Sandra's questions with a new, unreadable calm.
When the door opens for her, I will be standing right beside Catherine, and I will not look away.
Catherine stepped over the threshold, forcing Sandra backward into the foyer. The relatives in the dining room craned their necks.
I'm Catherine Morgan, Federal District Judge, and I have the original adoption paperwork that Sandra Caldwell signed in 1996.
She lifted the manila envelope and pulled out a yellowed legal document, crisp despite age. The contract.
That's not admissible. You can't just walk in here.
But Sandra's voice cracked on the last word. The authority in Catherine's stance made the objection sound like paper tearing.
Now hold on. We don't know who you really are. This is private property.
The letter that told me my daughter had died was signed by Sandra Caldwell. I have it here, along with the original postmark.
Helen stepped closer, her hand over her mouth. Other relatives hovered behind her, torn between fascination and dread. Sandra didn't take the envelope. Her hand hovered in the air, trembling, and fell back to her side. The document hung between them, undeniable. For a long second, even the clock seemed to pause.
Quarterly photographs, annual visits, the right of the biological mother to a direct relationship with the child.
Her finger slid to the bottom of the page, stopping on Sandra Caldwell's hurried signature next to the date.
This is your hand, Sandra. You signed it in front of a notary.
I don't remember that. It was so long ago.
Then explain this. We regret to inform you that the child died in her sleep. The letter you sent me 6 months after she was born.
Helen made a choked sound. Another relative whispered, "Dear God." Frank eased backward, his shoulder blades grazing the coat rack, one hand already reaching for the wooden peg.
I had the handwriting analyzed. It matches yours, Sandra. The postmark is from this address.
And then Catherine laid the contract in Sandra's trembling hand. Sandra stared at her own signature as if it had been written by a stranger. The foyer had become a courtroom. No gavel needed. The evidence had already spoken. The screen door creaked. Every head turned. Olivia stood in the doorway, her silhouette sharp against the spring light.
How long have you known?
Olivia didn't flinch. She walked forward until she stood shoulder to shoulder with Catherine.
14 months. I've been meeting my real mother every Sunday. I know everything.
Sandra's face drained of color. Her mouth moved, but only a dry rasp came out.
You've been sneaking around behind our backs?
Behind your backs? You mean like the way you hid my adoption and told my birth mother I was dead?
Catherine didn't speak, but her hand found Olivia's. The gesture was quiet, and it shattered the last pretense that this family had ever been whole. The relatives watched, frozen, as the true shape of the Caldwells' betrayal became impossible to ignore.
You said I was different because I was adopted. The only difference was that you lied to me and she never did.
I have boxes of evidence at home. Every intercepted letter, every forged reply, the whole chain of custody. I could have taken this to court years ago.
Sandra's hand shook so hard the water in her untouched glass rippled.
You're a judge. You can't just... This is harassment.
I'm not here as a judge. I'm here as the woman whose daughter was stolen. But if you want a courtroom, I can arrange that.
Helen stepped back as if the air had thickened. An elderly aunt clutched her cross necklace. Sandra's lips moved, but her voice was a dry scrape. The contract trembled in her grip. Frank loosened his collar with a shaking hand. The coat he'd been reaching for lay forgotten on the rack.
I waited because Olivia asked me to. She wanted to be ready, and now she is.
The house had never felt so small. 22 people. And the only sound was the slow clench of Sandra's pearl earring against her cheek as her head bowed. But no one moved toward the door. No one reached for a phone. They just stood there, waiting for what came next. The strength Olivia showed now had been forged years earlier in quiet humiliations that nobody at that table had ever noticed.
You're always so different from us, Olivia. Maybe you just don't belong here.
The 8-year-old didn't understand why the words stung more when they came with a smile. On her 10th birthday, Olivia sat alone on the porch steps. No one stayed for cake. At 16, cleaning the attic, she found adoption papers with a circled name, Catherine Morgan.
Sandra snatched them and struck a match. This is none of your business. I did what was best. If you go looking for her, you're not my daughter.
To the ashes, Olivia whispered. One day I'll find her, and you won't stop me.
That vow hardened through every snide comment, every hollow holiday, every time Frank looked the other way. Now, beside Catherine, those ashes felt like cold embers in her chest. She was ready. 2 years earlier, the thought had come on a quiet Sunday evening in her apartment. Her partner had joked about one of those ancestry kits. Find out if you're secretly a Viking princess. But the joke hung in the air, and Olivia couldn't laugh. Because she had questions no one in her family would ever answer. She ordered the kit at 2 a.m., her pulse quickening as she clicked confirm. When the box arrived, she hid it in the back of the pantry for a week before she could bring herself to open it. Spitting into the tube felt absurd, but also like the first thing she had ever done for herself alone. Then the waiting. Weeks of refreshing a dashboard she told no one about. When the notification pinged, she nearly dropped her coffee. The screen glowed, 99.7% match, Catherine Morgan. She wasn't different. She had been lied to, and now she had proof. The foyer felt electric, every relative bracing for the next blow. But Catherine's hand went back to the envelope.
There's one more thing.
The room tightened. She withdrew a second document, yellowed, notarized, held like a weapon.
In 1996, my family established an irrevocable trust for Olivia. $1.2 million. It was for her college, her health care, her future. I made sure she would never need anything from you.
Sandra went gray. Her fingers crushed the pearls at her throat. Frank's swallow was sharp and hollow, the sound of a man realizing how deep the hole beneath him went. The trust document floated between them, a promise no one there could keep. A lily petal drifted down and landed. It was the loudest noise in the house. No one asked where the money had gone. The question was a held breath. Catherine's hand went back into the envelope one last time. She pulled out a thin bank statement, creased from years of folding and unfolding.
I checked the account balance 18 months ago, right before I reached out to Olivia.
She turned the page toward the room. The heading read, Irrevocable Trust for Olivia Bennett. The balance read, 0.
Withdrawals in the names of Frank and Sandra Caldwell, year after year for almost 2 decades.
The room erupted in muffled gasps. Helen covered her mouth, but a cry escaped anyway.
No, that's not our doing. It can't be.
But her hands shook so violently the water in her glass splashed onto the tablecloth. Frank didn't speak. Sweat slid down the side of his face, carving pale tracks through the flush. The trust document and the bank statement now lay side by side, one promise, one betrayal.
The trust specifically forbade commingling. You didn't borrow this money. You stole it.
Olivia took a single step forward, her eyes fixed on the bank statement. The numbers blurred with her tears, but the theft was undeniable.
You told me we couldn't afford a good college. You said I had to take out loans.
Her voice cracked on the last word, but she didn't lower her gaze.
We took care of you for 28 years. We deserved something for it.
Deserved? Deserved to steal from an infant?
The question hung like a slap. Sandra's hand flew to her chest, her face crumpling.
I sat in those chairs listening to you tell everyone I was the difficult one, and all along you were spending money that wasn't yours. All those years they made me feel like the burden, and they were the thieves. You stole my mother's love, then you stole my future. There's nothing left for you to take.
Catherine's knuckles whitened on the envelope. Not a single relative breathed.
That money was ours the minute you left her with us. We raised her. We paid for everything.
His voice cracked like a bellowed order, but the words landed hollow.
Raising a child doesn't entitle you to drain her trust. It's fraud, plain and simple.
A few relatives stepped back, their eyes darting between Frank and the open door.
Frank, stop. You're only making it worse.
She yanked his arm, her nails digging into his sleeve, but he shook her off. Helen shook her head, a single tear tracing the deep line of her cheek.
You can't prove any of this is criminal. It's a civil matter at best.
Fraud, perjury, and theft are all criminal. The court will decide.
The word court landed like a locked door. Sandra's grip tightened again, but the damage had already spread through every relative's face, turning the Easter lilies into a jury.
Sandra, you told me Catherine died in a car crash. I believed you for 30 years.
Helen's voice was quiet, but it cut through the room like a scalpel.
Helen, It wasn't. I was protecting.
Another relative, an older man in a tweed jacket, stepped forward. He looked at the empty champagne flutes, then at Frank. He muttered just loud enough for the room to hear. That beach house they bought 10 years ago, Frank always said it was an inheritance from his side. Sandra's mouth fell open, but no words formed. Her eyes darted to Frank, then away. The relatives began to step back, a quiet withdrawal that was louder than any shout.
Please, everyone, you have to understand. We loved her like our own.
No one replied. The Easter lilies nodded in the draft from the still open door, and a handful of relatives picked up their coats. Olivia faced Sandra and Frank one last time. Her voice was low but carried through the silent foyer.
I will never forgive you. Not for the lies you told me, not for the money you stole.
Sandra reached for her water glass. Her hand shook so badly that water leaped over the rim and splashed the tablecloth.
I'm leaving now, and my lawyer will be in touch about the trust.
Frank fumbled with the buttons of his coat, his gaze darting toward the open door. Sandra's grip tightened on the glass until her knuckles whitened. Olivia turned, and for a moment her shoulder brushed Catherine's. Catherine's eyes never left Sandra. She walked toward the door. The relatives parted, and no one tried to stop her. Frank grabbed the coat rack peg. He didn't pull the coat off, not yet. Olivia paused at the threshold, silhouetted against the bright afternoon. Behind her, the glass hovered and the coat hung half-drawn. The glass slipped. Time stretched as it fell, water arcing in the sunlight. Then it struck the floor, shattering into 100 bright shards. Every person in the room flinched. The sound swallowed the silence whole. Frank lunged. His hand closed on the coat rack, yanking the trench coat toward him in a frantic rustle. But Catherine moved faster. Her palm pressed flat against the rack, blocking the coat before it could leave the hook.
You're not leaving yet.
Sandra's knees buckled. She sank into the nearest dining chair, her legs giving way as a wet sob escaped her. She covered her face with both hands, the pearls at her throat trembling with each shake of her shoulders. Catherine didn't look at her. The envelope was still in her hand, the trust document visible on the table. The only sound was the drip of water from the edge of the table, threading through the silence where the crash had been. No one moved toward the door. No one picked up the shards. The Easter lilies seemed to bow their heads. Olivia turned from the door and walked back to the table. No one stopped her. She lifted the adoption contract and the trust document. The paper rustled in the quiet. She folded them carefully, tucking them against her chest like something worth far more than the broken promises they represented.
These are mine now.
Without another word to Sandra or Frank, she walked toward the door. At the threshold, she paused and looked back. Sandra was still collapsed in the chair, her sobs muffled by her hands. The broken glass lay scattered on the floor. Frank stood frozen, the coat still hanging from the rack, Catherine's palm still pressed against it. Olivia's gaze swept the room, the relatives huddled in the doorway, the lilies wilting on the table, the shards of glass reflecting the spring light. Then she stepped outside, and the screen door closed with a soft click behind her. The morning sun was still bright. She walked down the porch steps alone, the documents pressed to her heart. Catherine appeared at the top of the porch steps. She walked down slowly, her heels silent on the grass.
I'm sorry it had to be this way.
I'm not sorry it's over.
For a moment they just stood there, the house looming behind them, the echo of the shattered glass still trapped inside. Then Catherine placed a hand on Olivia's elbow, and they turned toward the SUV together. Olivia slid into the passenger seat. The documents were still folded against her chest. Catherine started the engine. The black SUV pulled away from the curb, crushing pedals as it had when it arrived. Through the side mirror, Olivia watched the house shrink. The door was still open. No one came out. The cherry tree blurred past the window, petals scattering like old confessions. Neither spoke. The road ahead was unfamiliar, but for the first time in years, Olivia didn't feel lost. Months had passed since Easter. The Caldwell house was only a memory in the rearview mirror. She stood in the marble corridor of the federal courthouse, waiting. A door opened. Catherine stepped out in her black robe. Seeing Olivia, the weariness left her face. Without words, Catherine opened her arms. Olivia stepped into the embrace, her cheek against the wool robe. A paralegal approached with a slim folder. Catherine took it and pressed it into Olivia's hands. Inside was the restitution settlement. The trust had been restored. The numbers were whole. Olivia opened the folder. The trust document she'd folded on Easter now bore a new stamp. Restored.
It doesn't bring back the years, but it proves they were mine.
She looked up at Catherine, who was watching her with the same steady gaze she'd worn on the doorstep. Then they walked out together into the light, two women, one history, and a future no one could steal. Alone on a park bench, Olivia watched the sun sink behind the trees. Beside her lay the adoption contract and the trust document, their edges curled. In her hand she held a new photograph. She and Catherine laughing, taken only last week.
She really does laugh like me.
A tear slid down her cheek, but she didn't wipe it away. It wasn't a tear of grief anymore. She picked up the documents and stood. The paper felt heavier than it looked. The adoption contract, the trust statement, they were proof of a stolen past, but now they were also a deed to a life she could finally build on her own terms. She began walking, the grass soft beneath her shoes. The park path opened ahead, drenched in gold. Behind her, the bench was empty. The photograph was tucked into the documents, out of sight but not out of mind. Olivia walked toward the camera, her expression resolved. The documents were not a burden, they were a compass. The sunset stretched her shadow long across the grass. For the first time, it pointed exactly where she wanted to go.